Hey YouTube, it's Adam here with Retro Repairs, and I got another repair video for you today. So as you can see in front of me, we have a copy of Conker's Bad Fur Day for the N64. Overall, I mean, the label's pretty worn, and the shell actually is starting to look a little yellowed. You see it kind of up there. But it doesn't work at all. So I try and pop it into the N64, and I get absolutely nothing. It doesn't even show a signal as being on. So I'm going to show you what I mean. So that's all I get on my TV, no signal. So normally, if the contacts were just dirty, usually I'd get a black screen, but this is getting absolutely nothing. So I'm going to show you as a comparison. I'll pop in a game I know works. And there we go. So N64 is fine, it's hooked up right, but something wrong with Conker. So let's crack her open and see what we've got. Alright, so let's open up this cartridge, flip it over, and there are two security screws that need to come out. So they make a special screwdriver bit called a game bit screwdriver, which is commonly referred to as, and what this does, it takes out these little security screws right there. There are ways to get them out if you don't own one of these bits. However, they cost like $2, so save yourself a few headaches and just order one online. So at first glance, doesn't look too bad. Let's take these two screws out and take a look at the board. Alright, so a couple of things I note. Right here, it looks like there's a bit of corrosion, so that tells me there's probably some corrosion elsewhere, possibly along one of these traces. Same thing on the back right here. There could be a break in that trace, so I'm going to have to grab my multimeter and we're going to check each and every one of these pins, make sure that it's terminating properly. So to test continuity, grab a multimeter, and it will have a setting for to test resistance, and it'll usually make a beep when there is no resistance, so like so. Now, what you're going to do, follow the traces from the pin to where it should connect, and you'll get a beep. So keep doing this along each and every one. You want to try and find somewhere that it's getting a connection right there. There we go. And so forth. So I'm going to test all of these and make sure there's no continuity issues. So I've found a bad trace here, and it comes right off this pin right here. This pin should go under, and I believe it should connect to the second pin from the top left on this chip right here, and it's not. I've run my probe along all of these, and I'm not getting anything. Nothing from any of these vias. So I went and I scraped a bit of the solder mask off the trace here. So just to make sure I get continuity from there to there, but I don't get continuity from here to here. So that tells me that there's a break somewhere right along here, right above where it says 38. So we're gonna have to fix this trace right here. So it's not really not actually a very difficult procedure. What you need is a knife, and you're gonna scrape away the solder mask along this trace. So the point here is to expose bare copper, and we're gonna give it a bit of a cleanup here and then test it to find out exactly where that break actually is. So we can actually see it right now. That's kind of difficult to see, where are we? But it's actually right above where 38 is. So grab my probes again. And So when I test along this leg up here, we get continuity. When I test below the leg here, we get continuity. Right along this corner is where that break is. So what we need to do is fire up the soldering iron, and I'm going to show you what to do to fix that. So what I'm going to do first is grab a little piece of wire, and I have some 30 gauge braided wire, and just start stripping it. So try and get the sheathing off. You don't need a ton, but that should be more than plenty. And now what I'm going to do is get a couple strands and just twist them together. So I'm going to use this to solder it over top of that trace, basically rerun that trace and create a bridge. So we're going to twist that together. I'm going to grab my flux and just put a little bit of flux on this thing here. Now, using the soldering iron, clean off the tip and add some solder to it. Get a whole bunch, and really, oops, it's kind of separated. All I'm now doing is just running the solder along this wire. So I want to get solder on it. Makes it easy to solder it now. It also kind of binds those two strands together. Perfect. Now I'm just going to cut it off and get rid of the rest of it. So we're going to do a similar thing to the actual trace now. I'm going to put some flux on that. Where's my flux pen? Right here. Using flux is important. It really helps clean the surface and helps guide the solder to where you want it to be. So once again, clean that tip off. Load up the soldering iron with more solder. And then I just run it along the length of this trace here. Perfect. Got a little bit on the pad actually, so I'm going to go back with some soldering braid just to clean that up. Good. Now is sort of the tricky part. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, holding that into place, I'm going to try and tack the wire onto that trace. There we go. Then bend it over and do the same thing along this part of the leg. There we go. So that is now on. Lift up the remainder here because you don't want any of the leftover bits shorting to another pin. Very good. Now we can just go over it once again with the soldering iron, and it just kind of smooths it out a bit. So get a little bit of flux or solder on there. Just run it up the length of this. And again, we're going to trim off anything remaining there. Okay, that should be okay. So once again, going to clean that up and then do a continuity test. So some alcohol. Now grab the multimeter, and we should have continuity from the bottom of the trace up to the top. And then find out where it connects, right there on the second pin, as I had thought. So I'm going to continue with this to check for any other bad traces. Okay, so I've gone and I've tested the rest of these, and I am getting continuity over everything else. So you see these that look kind of rough, they still work. So it definitely needs some cleaning up, but theoretically, this probably will work now. So we're gonna put it back into the cartridge, and let's see what happens. So putting it back in is not difficult as well. You're gonna put these shields back into place. And then I believe the chips usually face the back of the shell, if I'm not mistaken. Just like so, yep. So this is the front part. It's gonna sit in place nicely like that. And put the other part of the shield on. And then let's give it a test. All right, so testing it after that fix. And look at that, we've got Conker's Bad Fur Day booting up. So as you can see, it's working pretty well. A reasonably quick repair, and there's a couple quick things that I want to do still to this cartridge, just to make sure it's not going to continue to be a problem. Okay, so the last few things that I want to do this are really just kind of preventative maintenance to it. And what that is just kind of getting rid of some of this rust and cleaning it up overall. We want to make sure that we're not going to have this issue happening again in the future. And you can see there's some residue on this board, so just want to clean it up, get that residue off the board so that whatever got in here isn't going to continue eating away at this. Lastly, over top of this trace that I've repaired, I want to put a little bit of clear coat for nail polish on it, and that just helps to eliminate the oxidization. So what I'm going to do for that existing rust is really just sand it down a little bit. So for this, just going to use some very fine grit sandpaper, 2500 grit, and try and just kind of scrape away at this. I might actually need to go to something a little finer, or more coarse, not fine. No, that's doing the trick. Okay, so a little bit of sanding. This has helped to remove the rust that was building up here in a couple places. Now, all I'm going to do on top of that is just hit it with a little bit of clear coat for nail polish, and then that should be pretty good to go. I actually lied, I'm not going to use clear coat at all. I'm going to use a little bit of green. Green's just kind of aesthetic reasons, because all of this was green, so maybe it'll look a little bit better, but I'm not really trying to hide anything. We just want to make sure that it's not going to continue to rust. Otherwise, that looks okay. So I'm going to let that dry, and we're going to see how that looks once it's all dried up. So while I'm waiting for that to dry, I just wanted to touch on one other thing. In one of my last videos, I did exactly this repair, and a number of you were asking if I could just put a blob of solder there to bridge the connection, and the answer is sometimes. These traces are fairly small, so it can be difficult to get an appropriate amount of solder on the trace to actually bridge over a break. Depends on the size of the break. Now this break wasn't very big, so I probably could have just used a blob of solder. The reason I don't is because, again, there's such a little amount of solder there that if this flexes for some reason and that solder cracks, we're going to run into the same problem. This piece of wire embedded within the solder will help to reduce the case of that happening. So say some of the solder does crack, that wire hopefully will stay attached in a couple other locations. That's why I went further down the length of that trace than absolutely necessary. So it'll just create a little bit of a stronger connection, which is always a good thing. If you don't trust yourself soldering something like this, I mean, I don't find it difficult, but it's kind of precise work a bit. So if you don't really feel confident in doing that, you could absolutely just use some flux and put a blob of solder in place. But I think this technique will create a little bit better job. So that's really going to be it for today's video here. So I actually just went and put some nail polish across the whole length here. Again, just kind of adds a little bit of extra surface there in case this rubbing down that happens from this piece of plastic here, just to prevent that from continuing. But otherwise, this should be all set to go. So appreciate you watching. I hope you learned something on how to repair a game that might not be working for you. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave it below. Like the video and hit that subscribe button. All the likes, views, and subscriptions really help make sure my videos get the views, and they tell me that you like what you're seeing. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next video.